Welcome to the very first episode of Define American with Jose Antonio Vargas. I'm Jose. Like millions of other undocumented immigrants, I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to survive the next 4 years. One way I will strive to do that is by telling the truth about the immigrant experience in this country, the full immigrant experience in a country founded by the freedom of movement and in a country where the lies, misinformation, and disinformation about illegal aliens played a central role in bringing Donald Trump back to the White House. Telling the truth and facing the consequences of doing so is why, 31 years later, I'm still an undocumented immigrant after arriving here in California from the Philippines in 1993. I was 12. 4 years later, I found out I was here illegally, that my green card and passport were fake, when I tried applying for a driver's license. A year after that, because of an English teacher who suggested I go into journalism because I was asking too many questions, I became a journalist. And that's what I am, a journalist who happens to be gay, Filipino, and undocumented. To survive as a journalist, tasked with reporting facts and providing context and telling the truth, I lied about myself. I had to lie to get jobs. I tried to pass off as an American. I hid as much as I could from the government without realizing I was also hiding from myself. Lying, passing, hiding, any immigrant, any human being knows what that feels like. Then 13 years later, as some of you may already know, I decided to come out for the second time in my life and tell the truth about my immigration status. The truth is not only a dangerous thing, it's uncomfortable, it's unsafe, it requires asking hard questions and demands that we listen to each other to see the fullest picture we can. And that, in essence, is what the show is about. Centering the immigrant experience in America and telling the truth, the whole truth, the full picture, as uncomfortable, unsafe, and dangerous as the truths may be. Here's the truth. According to the Pew Research Center, as of 2023, we live in a country of a record 47.8 million immigrants. That's an increase of 1.6 million from the previous year. This is the largest annual increase in more than 20 years since 2000. Now, to put that into context, in 1970, the number of immigrants living in the U.S. was about a fifth of what it is today. And in the next 50 years, the majority of our country's population growth will come from immigrants and our offsprings. And when I say immigrants, I mean human beings of various races, ethnicities, economic and educational backgrounds. It's green card holders, DACA recipients, people with TPS, temporary protected status. It's about Black, Latino, Asian, white immigrants that we don't talk about that much. Students, workers, artists, refugees from places like Ukraine and Afghanistan. Since 2011, I've traveled all across the country, and I've met some of you, engaging Americans of all backgrounds and asking this fundamental question: how do you define American? When we start deporting people person by person, family by family, that's the question we are going to be asking. Starting today, this show will ask questions and document what is happening with immigrants in our country. And thankfully, YouTube is borderless. I don't need a valid US passport or a green card to host the show wherever I am in this country. I hope you join me. I hope you join us. And I hope that in the process you get to define who and what an American is. Today, on our inaugural show, I am really proud to welcome two very brave women, human beings I've gotten to know in this past decade or so of doing this work publicly. The first is Patrice Lawrence, Executive Director of UndocuBlack and an advocate for undocumented and formerly undocumented Black immigrants. And the second, Erica Andiola, who's a leading immigrant rights activist based in Phoenix, Arizona, currently the Communications Director at Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights. And among other things, she's had many other things happen in the past decade or so, she was the press secretary for Latino outreach for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for joining me and for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
I'm so excited about this conversation. I'm going to actually get started with Patrice. And I think before we go on, given that I had just told kind of a truncated version of my immigrant story, Patrice, would you mind sharing your immigrant story?
Yeah. I'm Jamaican by birth. I came to the United States actually for the first time when I was 5. I traveled back and forth to this country for many, many years, actually. And then I made the choice to come here for university. And I had a F1 status, a student visa. And then I did the work permit after that. And then I overstayed. And so I became undocumented for over 12 years, almost 13 years of being undocumented in this country. And along the way, I met some really interesting folks. I met Jose over 10 years ago via phone call through someone else. And then I met a group of folks who were creating something called the Undocumented and Black Convening.
Hmm.
And now, almost 10 years later, that is the Undocu Network, and I have served in helping to be one of the founding people of that network, going from volunteer to now the executive director. My background is policy, and I have lived all over the United States of America. I've been to over 30 states, the majority of which we actually have members of Undocu Black who are from Latin America, they're from the Caribbean, Africa, some even from Europe, and made a pit stop before getting here. So I've learned a lot during these 10 or so years about myself and about others and about what it's like to be Black and undocumented in the United States.
Thank you for that, Patrice. I remember that first initial exchange. Erica, turning over to you. And I remember, Erica, the first time you and I met, it was actually the first public event I'd ever done at the Capitol. I think it was the Senate building, and you were hosting it. You were hosting this event.
Yes, I remember that very clearly too. Yeah, yeah, we had you as a speaker, and I was actually really excited to meet you. You were kind of like a little, I don't know, I was kind of starstruck when I met you.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. But yeah, Erica, please tell us your immigrant story.
Yeah, well, my grandpa was something that folks here called abracero.
Mm,
Abracero was someone who was brought here to this country to work legally back in the, gosh, I don't even know the actual year, but I mean, my grandfather already passed away, so it's been many, many years. Um, he was brought here to work in California in the fields, and eventually he started working paving the roads of California as a guest worker. They would call them braceros. And he ended up getting injured in a horrible way as he was doing this work and ended up back in Mexico many, many years later. But guess what? He had 11 kids, and part of the kids ended up coming to the US with him when he was a guest worker, except my mom didn't come with him. Many years later, she was well, my whole family was victims of domestic violence by my own dad. And as a lot of families who live sort of in between the US and Mexico, it was a very, very clear thing. Well, we need to find safety somewhere else. So we came here to the US. Unfortunately, we tried to get a visa. We were never able to get a visa because we were actually really poor. And back in those days, and probably still, to be able to get a visa to come to the U.S., most of the time you have to have resources. It showed that you have the resources. So we came like many people did in the 90s. We crossed the border. I still remember, have those memories as a 11-year-old kid walking through the border, and with my family. And yeah, 26 years later, we're here. I spent a majority of that time undocumented and ended up becoming an activist and an organizer because of that. And eventually I was able to get my DACA. And just very, very recently, I got married 3 years ago to a U.S. citizen. And I just became a resident, this year. And it feels it's so bittersweet, to be honest. I was
yeah.
really excited, and I also cried a lot because my family is still undocumented and very much vulnerable. Um, And so the guilt is there for some reason, even though I'm not the responsible one for that. I still feel a lot of guilt. I'm gonna end it there, but well, I know we're gonna talk a lot more about our stories.
Yeah. I have to say, by the way, like what you're seeing here are three very specific stories that actually represent the diversity of the complex and nuanced immigrant experience in America. As I'm sitting here listening to both of you, I'm thinking to myself, I rarely see a black immigrant, a Latina immigrant, and an Asian person, an Asian immigrant, all in the same frame talking about this issue. So that alone to me is important, right? And Patrice, I'm going to go to you first because as a follow up, I remember when I started Define American in 2011, the very first event I did in Michigan, somewhere in I think in Detroit, this woman stood up, black woman, and outed herself in this room and said, I don't know where to go. Where do I go for help? And I'm looking at her and I'm going, I don't know. I don't. Back then, I had not heard of BAJI, the Black Alliance for Just Immigration. The Undocumented Black Network wasn't around yet. And I think it speaks to how this issue has been so associated with the border, right, with Mexico. And of course, that's appropriate given the population people impacted. But that kind of prioritization has decentralized a lot of groups of people, including black immigrants. So I want to talk to you about that. What has it been like in terms of the unique experience of being a black immigrant in this country?
When we think about being a black immigrant here and being a black undocumented immigrant currently or formerly, it's such a wide range of people, right? So I remember during the last iteration of 45, and when he introduced the Muslim ban, and for those who need me to say the name, Trump, and just the experiences that we had of members who were black and Muslim and who were almost like invisibilized during this Muslim ban, right? And you add to that, if they have an accent, if their name sounds funny to the American society. And even people who are not undocumented but are immigrants and they're coming in and out the airports, they have a really hard time, and so even if their country was not on the Muslim ban list. And so I think to even talk about the border, notice like you're referring to the southwestern border, but we've got a northern border too, but no one pays attention to it. And I won't say it's because they're white, but it's because they're white, and it's because they're considered to be white in the United States, because we understand, and I think this is also critical as like a black person. We've been through so many versions of what white supremacy looks like. We've been through so many versions of colonialism, if you're a black immigrant, that we also understand the constructs. And so who is considered a white person in America, who is considered to be worthy or deserving, it changes. It changes over time. One that kind of remains the same, though, is once you're black, you're still black. And especially if you're more melanated. And so the experience overall raises the gamut. It goes across the gamut. I came as a visa student holder. There are folks, especially within the past 10 years, who are coming actually as asylum seekers through the southwestern border by foot. There have been folks for many years who've come by boat. There's the rest of us who come by airplane, and we come to the United States.
And Erica, as I'm listening to Patrice, we live in a country where 1 out of 10 black people in America is a black immigrant, right? And even that reality, when I say that to my friends who are black, who are not immigrant, they're kind of like, wait, what? Yep, 1 out of 10. I remind them. With Erica, however, I want to say, as somebody like Patrice who's been traveling nonstop, and I know that you have been too, Erica, especially when you were working with the Bernie Sanders campaign, to me, one of the saddest realities of America is how illegal and Mexican as terms have become interchangeable. Like, something in me dies whenever I hear people, because a lot of people assume I'm Mexican just because of my name and because I'm undocumented, right? And I'm like, and I have to correct them, and I'm like, nope, I'm not. I'm Filipino. And just because people are Mexican doesn't mean they're undocumented. There are, what, 40 million Mexicans in this country, millions of who have been here before there was an America, Arizona being, owned by Mexico before, all of those. And I'm so glad that you brought up your grandfather who was part of the Bracedo program, because that speaks to it. Can you talk to us about right now in Arizona, where 1 out of 8 people in Arizona is an immigrant, right? How the Mexicanization of this issue, how has that been like watching that unfold these past few decades?
It's tough. I think at a personal level, it's you have this constant feeling that you don't belong in this country as an immigrant. And I don't know if you both ever have this feeling. I think recently I've had it more and more as like, gosh, like if I was to live again in Mexico, I would feel like an outsider because now that I have my green card, I've been back and I feel a bit of an outsider as someone who has lived most of my life in the US, but then I am here and I honestly, I sometimes just feel like I also don't belong here. And on top of that, I have a history as a Mexican American. I mean, now, sometimes I call myself a Mexican American, right? Someone who's here that has a deep history. My people, my culture has a deep history in this country. I mean, in Arizona, I've learned so much more about the history of Arizona. I'm like, wow, our folks were here before anybody else of white descent, or folks who were brought here as slaves, right? There's so much of that history that I'm like, okay, why do I feel like I don't belong here when in reality a lot of my ancestors were here before anyone else, other than of course our Native American folks. So it's hard. It's hard. The only thing that comes to my mind is honestly belonging, that I want to be able to feel that more because of that history. And then on the policy side, let's talk about the policy. That's just my own sort of emotion, my internal emotions about it. But in the policy side, what a lot of people don't understand and what is about to come with the next administration is that once you start thinking about immigrants as sort of solely Black people, then you have things like SB 1070, which was a law that passed a long time ago here in Arizona, which is like the know your papers right, or give me your papers right, or something like law. Now we have a new iteration of that through a ballot initiative in Arizona. And then now we have an upcoming president that has said he's going to do mass deportations. Well, guess who they're going to use to do that? The police, the sheriffs, law enforcement. Guess how they're gonna try to find people if they're driving around the streets, or if they're in the street, minding their own business. They're gonna find them by profiling them, and the majority of the time that racial profiling happens because they think somebody is a Mexican or a brown person. And we have so many instances here in Arizona since SB 1070 happened, where literally people who are Native Americans, people who are not even Mexican or Latino or undocumented or immigrants, they have been targeted just because of how they look. So it really has an impact in terms of policy of how our folks are being targeted and will be targeted. And a lot of them don't really, a lot of people even who voted for Trump don't really understand that this is going to happen. But trust me, I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes here in Arizona through those anti-immigrant laws that have already happened.
Patrice, I mean, and Erica has already brought this up, like how, in your thinking and in your conversations these past 3 weeks now, it's amazing to think it's only been 3 weeks or so. It feels like it's been a year already. How will Trump's second term be different from his first? How should activists and advocates and undocumented folks be preparing? What have you been telling people?
What I'm telling undocumented Black people versus what I'm saying to like the movement folks tends to be a little different. One of the things I've learned because of the first presidency is the importance of discretion, the importance to be discreet, and the importance of just making sure that people take care of themselves, right? And it could have been the amalgamation of both Trump and COVID and all the things that happened all at once. but a lot of folks got really sick. A lot of people were not well. We know that for a fact, right? And so we want to be able to make sure that after this presidency is over, and hopefully we never see Trump as president ever again, and nothing's changed, folks are still around for the long haul. So what does that look like practically? Look, we saw in the first presidency, he threatened deportation, he threatened detention, he threatened all these things, and a lot of them were not actually able to get done. But we saw with Project 2025, with the blueprint that he's written up, that he now has the plans down to a T. And I'm not saying this to scare anyone, just the facts. He has actual staffing charts down to who will be the administrative assistants in some cases to enact some of his plans and policies. They've spent a lot of time really looking at what this is going to look like. But I'm confident in our ability as advocates, as activists, to fight back too. And so in the first iteration, we're able to do that not only with law and with policy work and taking them to court, but also with mass mobilizations. This time around, I want to suggest that we slow down on the mass mobilizations because I saw the impact that that had on my community. I saw that that meant more policing. I saw that that meant Black people at protests being targeted. I saw what that surveillance looks like. And that's also what this next presidency, I think, is going to really entail. We have gone great lengths with AI and technology, and that's supposed to be beautiful. That's supposed to allow for people with disabilities, for people who are from varying backgrounds to have healthier, more sustainable lives. But unfortunately, in the wrong hands, that could mean that there's more monitoring, that it's much easier to catch people up. It's more easier to detain people, to deport them, globalization. So I think all of that to say that he's a lot more prepared this time, but I would also say that so are we. And so I've had a few tools in our little toolbox that we will be using with our members to make sure that they stay safe. I'm wearing a t-shirt today that says possibilities. And so that's actually, and this is on DocuBlack at the bottom, and I love it. And it's really our roadmap that we've had to make sure people can still be safe in the United States. And so I think networking with people, coming to places like on DocuBlack and allowing us to figure out what are ways that each individual can still get by, can still keep their sanity, have access to resources, mental health, money, food, whatever it is, as well as possible pathways to their legalization of their status. I'm interested in those things, and that's how I plan to spend a lot of my time during the next presidency. It's protecting our people and making sure that they're safe.
Erica, now turning over to you, building on what Patrice just laid out, what can people do to prepare? Like, what have you been telling people to do to prepare, especially if you're someone who may be directly impacted? Your parents may be undocumented, but you're a U.S. Not naturalized either by birth or through marriage or whatever. I mean, in your family, which is a mixed status family, this is a real reality, right? So, what have you been telling people to do to prepare?
Right now, as it stands, people have rights. And when it comes down to a raid, I will share personally, my house has been raided by ICE. So I have a lot of experience with that and how it looks like. And ICE can't come into your house if they don't have a warrant from a judge, which is really hard to get. And so if somebody comes into your house, or not into your house, if somebody comes and knocks on your door, you do have the right to say, I'm not going to open the door. And you don't have to open the door, right? You can say, I don't want to, I'm not going to say anything until I speak to my attorney, which leads me to being prepared with an attorney you trust, right? And the trust is a really important thing because there are a lot of bad actors out there telling people that they are attorneys or that they can do miracles for them. So finding somebody they trust is super important. And again, knowing our rights, I can do a whole presentation here and can go on, but I'm just going to say, for people to just Google, go into figuring out, like, what are the things that you can do, like protecting yourself, either it's a raid at your own home, at your work, in any other place. But I will say the second thing is prepare yourself with a network of people. One of the things that I did to be able to protect my mom from deportation, which was, God, a whole day of ICE came to my house like around 9 p.m. and I was able to stop my mom's deportation literally throughout the entire night I worked, and she came out of ICE like around 9 a.m. And it took a lot of organizing and a lot of, and I was able to do that because I had a huge network of people now.
I remember that time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was an organizer. I was an activist. I already knew you, Jose, at that time, and I knew a lot of the folks in the movement. So I wouldn't compare necessarily my situation and myself with the average undocumented person in this country. But I will say that you can start by plugging into organizations that are local, right? Organizations that are doing the actual organizing on the ground. With your neighbors, if you have neighbors you trust, right? For your neighbors to be in the lookout for anything that might happen, for them to be able to record if something is going on. If ICE comes to your home, recording anything that happens so that you have evidence of what they're doing. So a lot of those things can be done to prepare. And again, it's not necessarily to be paranoid, because trust me, before the ICE raided my home, part of me was like, oh my God, maybe I'm just being too paranoid because I'm too much around the movement, right? Or I'm too much around organizers that are telling me to do this. And then it happened to me. And there's a YouTube video out there if anyone wants to look. I literally did a YouTube video that night, crying, asking people to help me. Hello, my name is Erika. And if I am talking to you right now, it's because my mother and my brother were just thinking about immigration. And one of the things I said is, you know, I never thought it would happen to me, but it happened to me, and it can happen to anybody. And that's just the reality that we're going to be living in.
You both alluded to this, right? And let me just make it really explicit in terms of what has been said so far. Erica, you're saying make sure you have that you have your people, right? You have your people. Patrice, you got to make sure, right? There are some things that need to be kept discreet in this era of surveillance, in this era where AI. By the way, thank you for bringing AI up, because that's a tool that, yes, it has some benefits, but I'm really curious and anxious about how that's going to play out in this surveillance state that they have us going when it comes to immigrants. And Patrice, speaking of which, Republicans were laser focused on attacking Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio during the campaign. How do you see these rhetorical attacks being weaponized into policy under the second Trump administration? Why do you think they focus, for example, on that very specific community?
Many reasons. One of the top of the list, though, is the own failure of the American government overall to modernize. And not in the sense of AI, but in the sense of making sure their people are taken care of, right? And to insulate against greedy people, against people that want to exploit. Why do I mention this? Because what actually happened in Springfield was that Haitian migrants went to Springfield because they were basically invited. They were going to work, right? They were going to work. And so these were actually all people who had work permits. They were going to work at these car plants that had popped up. And Springfield, Ohio didn't have enough individuals to be able to do this work. And then what took place? Housing. We saw housing being a problem because of greedy landlords, right? Because instead of living in a house and paying, let's say, $500 for argument's sake, for a 1 bedroom, the landlords figured, wait, I could split this up in 4 and make $2,000 and charge each person $500. So what happened? Housing prices shot right up, right? Children, students, they had more children, more people going to school, and the city did not prepare for that. They didn't prepare to have more teachers. They didn't prepare for classroom sizes. They didn't prepare. And so white kids mostly, because that was who was there in Springfield, Ohio, they were not given the service that they were supposed to. And so these are the failures, actually, of the American government, and it goes straight up to the top. I'm not blaming any one city, municipality, any state. Think it goes straight up to the top, where we have deprioritized movement and growth of our communities, rural communities, right? And we have played politics with this. And so what do? You find a scapegoat. What better scapegoat than the black person? It's as old as time. The other thing is that Haitians are really, really powerful. They're really powerful, they're very strong, and they have given us a blueprint on freedom. So, in the last Trump presidency, Undocumented Network and several organizations, including African Communities Together, including Baji, we helped to create something called LRIF, Liberian Refugee Immigration Fairness. And do you know what LRIF is actually modeled after? HIRIF, Haitian Refugee Immigration Fairness, that passed in the 90s, okay? And so it's a similar act, and it allowed for people who had Liberian TPS or DED to get their green cards. There were 10,000 people and their families, their spouses, their children, and their immediate relatives were allowed to get green cards. And this passed in 2019 in a Trump presidency in the Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, 2019. I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that December. And watching Trump sign it, he did a big show of it, signed it on stage, and tucked away in that bill, with his knowledge actually, was this bill that allowed for legalization of several people, thousands of people actually. And that's really, really important. But who led the way for things like that? Haitians. They mobilized, they organized, and they found solutions. We know that they were one of the first colonies in the free world to get independence, right? 1804. And we know that they helped America get independence. And it was because of Haitians that they were able to acquire places like Louisiana, right? That's why there's still such a big Creole influence there, right? We know about the French. There is a rich, rich history of Haitians contributing to the United States. And there's a rich history of demonizing them as a result.
We can't escape the racial, not even undertones, overtones of what's happening. And I remember Arizona. I remember the first time I went to Arizona after I had come out as undocumented was in 2011. And 1070, I think, 10B, the show my papers law was in effect. I think it was being challenged at the time. I had an Uber driver because I could no longer drive as an undocumented person because people don't even know this. Most states don't allow undocumented people to drive, including Arizona. Is that correct, Erica? Yeah. And I remember my Uber driver talking about these illegals, and I just could not. By the way, this was out of nowhere. He was listening to talk radio and off he went. And I was sitting there and I'm going, do I say something? I did at the end. And then this is what I was referring to a few minutes ago when I talked Erica about the Mexicanicization of this issue. He goes, you don't look Mexican. And I said, well, because I'm not. I'm Filipino. Oh. And I'm saying this as a way to ask you, Erica, given Arizona, I mean, Arizona has always been a ground zero. Sometimes it's hard to figure out. Arizona, Florida, Texas, right? It's hard to figure out sometimes which state is competing for that. How do you think I want to talk now about the mindset, about what's happening kind of inside. All of the mass deportation media that we're hearing about, how do you think that's impacting people? Like, how is that affecting people's kind of day-to-day lives, specifically Mexican immigrants and Mexican Americans in Arizona?
I would have had a very different answer a few years ago when SB 1070 was in effect. There was a lot. So when we first started sort of this wave of anti-immigrant laws in Arizona, this was like 2006, I think, when a lot of it started. I mean, SB 1070 passed in 2010, but this started way before, where there were like a bunch of bills that were introduced over and over. There were this ballot initiatives. One of them was like taking away financial aid and institution for undocumented students, which affected me. And then there was a lot that it ended up being introduced. And at that time, Governor Napolitano, who was a Democrat, she ended up vetoing a lot of those bills. And then Obama gets elected, and he takes Napolitano to lead the Department of Homeland Security, right? So she gets taken away from Arizona as the governor, and we get Jan Brewer, who was a Republican governor, which I don't know who decided to make that move, but it happened. So we ended up with this Republican governor who ended up passing SB 1070. Now I'm saying this because we had sort of this like period of time of anti-immigrant laws that were happening over and over. And at first, the public, including a lot of Latinos, including a lot of Mexican Americans who didn't necessarily have ties to undocumented people, we're okay with it until people were getting stopped in the streets because the police thought they were undocumented. Again, I said it earlier, right? There were literally, we had the ACLU here locally who was taking calls from they had like a hotline where people could call. And the hotline was getting calls from Native Americans, from people who, just literally looked like they were Mexican or Latinos. Maybe they were not. From Mexicans or Latinos themselves who were not undocumented. So the police was just going to anyone who they thought was undocumented. And it was just one really funny thing that one politician said here was that you could tell if somebody was undocumented by just looking at their shoes. I mean, so this is like how they really thought about taking people out of the state and doing this mass race was by racial profiling, right? And so Arizona changed because people didn't like that. A lot of people of color were like, no, I don't really like that. So you ended up having Arizona sort of, in the past 10 years, changed politics. Now we have, a ton of organizers who became leaders here. We have Democrats in the Senate and who were elected, etc. Now, I'm saying that now it feels a little bit different because there was something that happened with Trump running for the second time that did shift some Latinos. And I will say it shifted some Latinos even here in Arizona. And even myself, I have family members, I have people who I know who back in those days were like, no, we would never vote for Trump. We would never do this. And now they were either thinking about Trump or ended up voting for Trump. What I'm hearing, a lot of the comments that I'm hearing is, oh, he's going to go after the criminals. He's going to go after the bad ones, not us. He's not going to go after us. And it breaks my heart because I've seen the playbook. I've seen it play out. And I know they are going to go after people who didn't necessarily commit crimes that's a whole other conversation, really. What does it really mean to be a criminal, as they say? But the sentiment has changed for some reason, and I think people are some are in denial, and others, like even members of my own family, even people also who I know, who are scared, who, they themselves are undocumented, they themselves might be in deportation proceedings. They themselves understand that they might be a target of what's coming, and they're afraid, and they're definitely anxious about what the possibility of a second Trump administration might be for their future and their safety. But yeah, things have changed so much, and I'm trying to make sense of all of it, to be honest.
Well, in future episodes of the show, we're actually going to be talking about what it feels like, to be an immigrant in a Latinx family, an Asian American family, and a Black immigrant family, where you have some Trump voters and some people who have voted for Trump. Like that tension, right, is very present and very real in a lot of our families. I'm sure we'll be having more uncomfortable conversations about that. Now, I wanna, given both of your backgrounds, I have to bring this up. Patrice, I'll start with you. Kamala Harris was the first Black woman, first South Asian, and first daughter of immigrants to be nominated for president by a major political party. What did that representation mean for the immigrant community, and where did that representation fall short?
In the aftermath of the election, I had a really heated conversation with a friend who was saying that she was really taking the election results hard. And She went to Howard, like Kamala. She's Jamaican, like Kamala. She's an immigrant. Kamala isn't an immigrant, but her father is. She's a black woman, like Kamala. And she said that the results of the election and the attacks that were made on Kamala, on Vice President Harris, felt like an attack on her. That it felt like from one of the first times she saw the closest representation of who she is, down to the school she went to, vying for the highest position in the land, and she still saw her being belittled, her being questioned. She saw that people said she wasn't qualified when compared to this mediocre white man who definitely isn't qualified. And it felt like she wasn't protected from those attacks, both my friend as well as Kamala. And it felt like we as a country have not moved forward in a way that we should. When you cannot see someone and not attack their laugh or their womanhood or their blackness or question their blackness and their immigrantness and they're assumed to be a liar and just all the really terrible, ugly things that happened during this presidential campaign and prior. And I think that's a good summary for how some folks felt after this. And we saw a real-time playbook, actually, of how a lot of black women, trans women, cis women are treated in this country. And how little regard, protection, respect is given to black women in this country. And from that, you can then piece out all the things, right? So, that happened. Childless women, apparently. We really saw what representation can mean and what is taken and what is left and how you're attacked if you are of a certain representation.
Thank you for sharing that, Patrice. Now, Erica, as a veteran, as somebody who worked in a presidential campaign, and as somebody, I mean, I've seen your lobbying efforts, your advocacy efforts, of course, within the Democratic Party, right? I'm curious, what was that like for you, watching Vice President Harris try to, in many ways, and again, to me, by the way, there's a lot of reflection that still needs to happen. People are getting really quick. I probably listen and watch too many podcasts and interviews of people providing insights where I'm like, wait a second, I still need some time. But for you specifically, what was it like witnessing Vice President Harris try to struggle to figure out where she is with immigration reform and with the border, and kind of what she needed to do to quote unquote win this election?
It was really hard to see a marketing machine against immigrants. I mean,
Marketing machine, marketing
billions,
machine.
yes, billions and billions of dollars that were spent to demonize and dehumanize immigrants in this country, right? And you're a journalist. I work in communications. We know how powerful it can be to have this amount of marketing around a specific group of people, and I don't think we should underestimate that. Even with a lot of people of color, it worked. I mean, a lot of people are repeating those things. Literally, every single ad that I saw, every single thing that I heard on YouTube, on the radio, a lot of people are repeating those things. Now, on the other side, it's not like we had a machine trying to push back against that, right? Like it wasn't like we had like billions of dollars trying to figure out how to humanize the immigrant community, how to tell a different story. Um, it really felt like we had another side that was trying to figure out how to like, okay, you're writing some of the things, but you know, there are some people that are good. Like, it wasn't a very clear message. It wasn't like they, you know, the other side spent that much money trying to defend the immigrant community. They were really trying to figure out how to, you know, talk about different issues. Now, I don't know if it was the winning. I'm not gonna sit here like you're saying, Jose, like a lot of podcasts and people who are trying to, you know, say like this was the reason why we lost. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it, you know, if we would have focused more on immigration on the Democratic side and humanized people, I don't know if we would have done anything different to the outcome of the election. But I know that in the moment it felt so, I felt so powerless. I felt so like what can I, this, you know, working class person who just has her voice to provide into this whole fight. Like, what can I really do against this powerful machine that is willing to make up lies and is willing to say anything that comes to their head about immigrants, and they are in a position of power, people where people are listening and trusting them. Like, what can I really do? So, you know, that's, you know, your question was more like how did I feel? That's how I felt, and I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what we could have done to be able to win against Trump, but I know for sure that the people who lost the biggest were immigrants throughout the campaign.
And I have to say, the marketing, this multi-billion dollar sophisticated machine that they have, this anti-immigrant machine, is going to be a big focus of this YouTube show. Because all you have to do is type immigrants or immigration on YouTube to know what undocumented people and immigrants in general are up against, right? And so we will really be focusing on that. Now, the last thing I want to say, this is going to be a recurring theme in every episode of the show. I put out a video out there, and please, all of you, I am not quite as good on social media, and I will get better. I promise I will. And so I put out a question a few days ago saying we'll be having the show, and at every episode we will leave the episode with answering a question from somebody on Instagram, on TikTok, on X. Yes, I'm still on X, on Facebook. And I woke up one morning and I got this note. And I'm going to read it. And I actually want the three of us to respond to it in one way or the other. So I'm going to read this note right now. Hi, Jose. I am a parent of a 24-year-old DACA recipient. After Trump won, my husband and I felt so defeated, but somehow saw the silver lining that we at least were living in California. For many sad and failed attempts, my husband and I did not get blessed with having our B2 visa turned into a working one. We also have an 18-year-old son who was born here. However, recently, my daughter felt so depressed that she made it clear to us that her hard work was all for nothing. It also did not help that the first lawyer we asked about her situation only told her to get married. But as independent as she was, she did not want to do that. All the positive things we told her were reluctantly met. My question, this is the question, how were you able to motivate yourself that there is more to life? And how should we deal with this dilemma of hers with her? Before I answer it, I'm gonna go to one of you first. Who wants to go first to offer some sort of advice here?
Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I also haven't been that, I haven't been okay. I don't know if this young DACA recipient is an advocate. It sounds like she is, that she had done some work on this. Um, I would say, you know, we have the courage to speak up, to stand up as people who have very little power in the great scheme of things, right? We can't vote. We can't, we do, most of us come from working class families. And yet we're here trying, we're here speaking out, and we have the courage to come out and say that, like yourself, Jose Antonio, that you're undocumented, like as I was doing it back in the day. And and that itself is just beautiful to me, that we have that courage to do that. And you know what? Nobody's gonna take that away from us. Nobody is gonna take that away from us. And the only thing that I can do right now, as I'm saying, I'm having a really hard time. The only thing I can do is to tap into those moments of joy that I can, as much as I can, and not deny myself from that joy. And I know that's been sort of a cliche word right now. It's a word that's been used a lot, but just in the pure sense of the real sense of joy, every day I'm trying to figure out, if my dogs give me joy, I'm gonna go with my dogs as much as I can and cuddle with them and do everything that I can to feel better. And if I get invited to a party, you know what? There's no shame in going to a party. You don't have to be organized. You don't have to be out there. It's okay to go to a party. It's okay to be with your family. Tapping into those moments of joy, I think right now, it's very, very important, because it's a reality. We're in a situation again where we were the ones who lost a lot as immigrants in this country.
When I started organizing, I was around the age of this young person. I was in my mid-20s, so it's been a while. And I think that I would not have been where I am mentally, emotionally, all of the lees, if I didn't have other people. So I think it's really important to surround yourself with other people. Trying to do this by yourself, no matter what your personality is, your background, it's really hard. We need people to see the God in us. We need people to see the beauty in us. We need people to reflect that back to us as often as we can. We need people to share food with us. We need people to learn from, to delve into things with. We need people. We need the right people around us. So I would really encourage her to continue to meet people, to know people, to love people, and to have those people in and around her life, especially during the next few years. The second thing I'd mention that almost made me cry. The second thing is delve into history. I don't care how smart people think they are. I don't care how smart the Republicans think they are. I don't care how smart anybody thinks they are. They're regurgitating something from the past. In some way, some shape, or form. We have seen this movie before. Somewhere in the world. And so reading into history can be really helpful. Look at apartheid, present and past, but I won't get into the present one. Look into the past apartheid. Look into South Africa. Look into how they fought that. Look into Tanzania. Look at my namesake, Patrice Lumumba. And yes, a lot of these people were killed and they died, and a few people are going to die. And that's not fun. But there are lessons to be learned about what it's like to be revolutionary. There are lessons to be learned about how to fight back. And there are lessons to understand for the way forward. And I would really encourage that. The last one is I would really suggest that people, and this person, everyone, really think about the word power. And really think about, do you have as little power as you think you have? Or is there other types of power that you need to tap into? And so I brought up for myself, because I'd done this with my team recently, where we kind of wrote like the different power that we have as Undocumented Black Network. And it was an exercise that I did back in 2021. And I did it again with them. And I won't name all of them, but I'll tell you what. We had, I think the last time, maybe 6 or 7 that we had named that we have in as organization. And we have about 20 now that people named, that they said we have. everything from like expert power, and the fact that we have a diversity of that. We speak different languages, we're from different parts of the world, we look different, our hair is different. You can use that power, information power, network, coalition power, what it means to have local political power, federal, narrative power, media, organizing, healing power, and healing justice, and being able to delve into that and also share it with others and access that. We've got more power than we think. And sometimes, even if we don't have the money power, those smaller pieces come together with the right set of people can create a thunderstorm. And it can absolutely create the change that we want to see. And I think you just have to believe in that as much as you possibly can in order to move forward.
Thank you for that. I have to say, you just reminded me when Trump was elected the first time. Um, one of my first calls with a dear friend named Elise, and I remember telling her, I don't know how this occurred to me, but this idea that if freedom can't come from this government, local, state, national, federal, then freedom must come from people. Like I am as free as the people I surround myself with, who give me permission to, like, when the door is closed, look for a window that, with a cracked, with some sort of opening. And then you reminded me, I'm one of those people that I go on all the YouTube, I go down YouTube to find James Baldwin videos. And there's this great one where Cornel West talked about how James Baldwin wasn't just somebody who had hope. James Baldwin was a guy who was a hope. He himself was a hope. And as I listen to you, Patrice, as I listen to you, Erica, and I know what you both have lived through and are living through and what you've stood for, you both are hopes. You are actually a manifestation of it. So thank you for that. And thank you for joining me. If you don't mind, I've decided that as a journalist who happens to be a writer, every episode will actually end with either a quote or a poem or a message from an immigrant. Any words that we can latch onto, because words mean something. And given that I am Filipino, Filipino American, the first passage is going to be from a book called America is in the Heart by a man named Carlos Bolosan, who moved to the US from Pangasinan, incidentally, where my grandfather is from, when he was 17 years old. And this is the quote that I will leave this episode with. Bolosan said, America is not a land of one race or one class of men. America is the nameless foreigner, the homeless refugee, the hungry boy begging for a job, and the black body dangling from a tree. America is the illiterate immigrant who is ashamed that the world of books and intellectual opportunities is close to him. We are that nameless foreigner, that homeless refugee, that hungry boy, that illiterate immigrant, and that lynched black body. All of us, from the first Adams to the last Filipino, native born, educated, or illiterate, we are America. And this conversation is America. Thank you for joining me.